Hello, my name is Sandra Alberti, and I work at Student Achievement Partners, and it is my pleasure to virtually deliver a kickoff address to all of you as you get started with the challenging yet very important work of continued learning in the implementation of the English Language Arts Common Core State Standards. So first of all, just to give you a bit of perspective, we do a lot of work in Student Achievement Partners in supporting teachers literally across the country, and appreciate the opportunity to support the work that you all are doing in Washoe County. We have worked over the years very closely with your leadership there, and quite frankly, it has been our privilege, and we are really excited about ways we can further do work together. So we will go through kind of some of the details of this work, but please know that it is our humble opinion that you are in very good hands, and we look forward to learning along with you about how best to get this challenging work of implementation done well in the classrooms across our country. So to start off with, I have the experience of doing this talk a lot, so I have a lot of kind of learnings of my own that have developed as I continue to talk with teachers and school leaders about what this work really entails. And so the one thing that I want you to think about to begin with is that this is nothing that we can give you. So I just finished saying what great leaders you all have in Washoe County, but they cannot make this easy for you. Just like the greatest teachers in our classrooms don't ever substitute for the real work that students have to do of actually learning as they go along. So don't expect somebody to kind of chew this up and deliver this for you. The work of implementation of the standards starts with really understanding the work, and that is something that each and every one of you need to do in order to make good decisions and good choices about how this in fact affects your own instructional practice. And so if we can just start with kind of grounding ourselves in some highlighted messages of what the Common Core State Standards in English Language Arts and Literacy require, I think you will find that one of the many opportunities that the Common Core State Standards affords us that we probably haven't experienced before is the concept that we are all working on a very similar initiative. So whether you're talking about what's going to happen with testing, or what's going to happen with instructional materials, or changes in your own teaching pedagogy, these things are now connected in a way that they've not been connected before. And most of this work is grounded in what we commonly talk about as the shifts to instructional practice. And so I'm sure you are familiar with them, you've heard them, but always worth grounding ourselves and understanding those yet once again. So if I could kind of touch on each of those, I want you to think about as you listen to these things, what this looks like in your classroom, what it looks like when you are doing these things as a teacher, what it looks like when students are actually experiencing these things as learners, and what it's going to take for us to get there. And so we need to think about the steps along the way, but really have a firm grasp at what the outcomes look like. So the first one of the English Language Arts shifts is this idea that students should be building knowledge through content-rich nonfiction. So an easy thought that a lot of people have with this is, oh, this just means we need to read more nonfiction. And so that's a piece of this. So we talk about in elementary schools going to about a 50-50 balance between fiction and nonfiction text. But probably more importantly than remembering that proportion is the idea that text is supposed to be a source of knowledge. So I talk to teachers all the time that, they go to workshops, they go to trainings, they hear this idea of more nonfiction, and they, for example, typically pick a day of the week and say, today we're going to read nonfiction, as if it's just an experience unto itself, something to endure. And it's more than something to endure. It's something that should actually teach students how from a piece of text they can learn about any period of history and time, any area of the world, any culture, and that learning how to get that information from the text is the key to that first shift. The second shift in English language arts and literacy is the idea that whether students are speaking, writing about a text, we always want them grounded in evidence from the text. And so to me, this seems so obvious. You're asking students to go through the work of actually reading something challenging, understanding something challenging, and, forgive me if this sounds nerdy, you should reward them for doing that work by asking them to complete a task that shows you they have in fact done that work. So I imagine, classrooms where this doesn't happen, where students are asked, to build dioramas, to write an essay, and so on, that doesn't require evidence from the text, and they could be sitting next to a student who in fact didn't understand the text at all, and have just as good of a shot at being successful in that assignment as the student who struggled with the text, made sense of the text, really thought about it, reflected on it. We want the assignments that students are doing in response to text to reflect and, quite frankly, reward that work. The third of the three shifts, I think, probably requires the biggest change in practice I see across the country as very typical. And what this shift is asking us to do is, when we're making choices about the precious time, limited time that we have with our students in classrooms, we need them practicing complex text. And so that doesn't just happen by accident. We know also that that doesn't happen by avoiding complex text, but it's actually a skill. You can think of it as an exercise that at first is really hard, it's really slow, but as students have more and more experience with complex text, the language of complex text, vocabulary, syntax, concepts, and so on, they get better and better at it. And we know that that's the only way to do it. And so this would take more and more support, probably than this idea of students just reading things at their level. But as they get stronger, the idea is that students should be reading increasingly complex things with increasing independence from the teacher. And so that's the goal. And so that has huge implications, particularly in places where students who are struggling readers are typically reading things that avoid that struggle. And so there's a part of that. Of course, we want to continue to encourage independent reading of students, volumes of reading, and that does need to be at a student's level of comfort. But when it gets to how do we get kids to read on grade level, they need the practice of reading complex texts. So that's the third of those three shifts. So kind of thinking about this a little bit larger scale, if I could be so bold as to perhaps impart some motivation upon you, what we are talking about in the work of Common Core state standards is how can we, as a nation, focus the work of teaching and learning on what we now know as the knowledge and skill set that best prepare kids for success after high school. How can we build a K-12 system that very well fits into what students' expectations are in trade schools, technical programs, 2-year colleges, 4-year colleges, and so on? That's the work that we're talking about right now. And so, this is challenging. And I think there are probably some places where people are still contemplating commitment to Common Core state standards. And from my perspective, I would love just to ask each of those teachers, so here's what it means for your kids to be successful. Here's what it takes for your kids to be successful. If you choose not to participate in a system that builds toward that, what's your other agenda? What else are you going to do? Because we all know that our responsibility as educators is to do much more than just keep our kids busy for 13 years of education, but to actually support them in the future success that they will have independent of our education system. So that's really what this is. And so these standards themselves are a good step toward that, because the way we can start thinking about the opportunity for delivering college and career readiness for all kids is if we first figure out what's most important. What are the things that we have to know in our hearts, our highlighted messages? And so that's really where you can start thinking about these shifts as those highlighted messages that you really want your students and your work to focus on in these, first few years of really deep implementation of the standards. So, as I said, this isn't a training. This is a learning process, learning for the kids, but most importantly, we need to think about what learning looks like for us as adults. You couldn't imagine, as a teacher, expecting your kids to get this right on their first shot, anything new that you teach them, particularly if it's rigorous. Likewise, we need to emulate that amongst ourselves. We need teachers talking to other teachers, learning from each other, sharing their learning, practicing, reflecting, all of those things that we know what good learning looks like. We need to expect that of ourselves and in our system of adults as well as of our kids. I am very excited that I feel very strongly that the leadership in Washoe County gets that. Part of what excites us so much about your work is the number of teachers that have been engaged in this idea of, let me just try this, let me figure this out, let me make sense of this. With skepticism or not, fine. We're not asking people to have blind faith in this, but try it. And one of the things that I think you will note, because I know a lot of your colleagues have experienced, you will be surprised what happens when we don't impose our own limitations on our students. When they really get what this means, I think you'll find that they often surprise you. So, this is all the work that we have here. And so I'm excited for you. I know this is just, further work in building on the work you've done so far. I encourage you to participate with so many of your colleagues across the country who are doing this work, and look forward to connecting and figuring out how we can best support you. So thank you all very much. Enjoy your learning.